So I was listening to this podcast a couple of months ago, and it was pretty interesting. It was an interview with this guy who had made a ton of money. I think back in I guess it would have been like the late 90s during the dot-com bubble, and really interesting. He was very honest, very humble, especially about his success. He kept saying he really didn't earn it. He said it was like all luck, the money he made. He said it was completely one of these, right place, right time kind of things. And he had like crazy money. And then he lost it, pretty much lost it all. And he described a couple of really bad investments, and I guess he had a financial advisor who was kind of swindled him out of money. So he lost it. He had it and he lost it, and then he got it back, but not right away. He described, he said, my life is sort of like a 2-act play. Act 1 was what I just described, this success that he had, but really hadn't earned. And then he said when he lost it, he went through this period, I think it was like a couple of years, where he just went on this kind of search for sort of like meaning in his own life. He said it was crazy because when he had all this money, everybody wanted to hear what he had to say. Everybody wanted to be around him. And as soon as he lost it, none of those people could be found. So it was just the shallowness of all of that struck him. So during this time, he really got into his faith, his Catholic faith. Hadn't really been much of a church guy prior. And he really started to practice the faith. And he got into therapy, started looking at kind of where he came from, his family background. And he got back into business, completely different business, but was even more successful in Act 2. And this time, he said, it wasn't luck. He really did earn it. It wasn't, right place, right time. He earned it because he had a very different approach and a very different strategy. And very simply, he said, I just took chances. I took chances in Act 2 that I wouldn't have even thought of taking in Act 1. And he took time to really give thought to what he was good at, his gifts, his talents. And he took chances with those gifts. And he said, he always really knew. He kind of knew what he was good at. He knew where he was comfortable and where his instinct was particularly sharp. But he never acted on it. He never acted on those gifts because it was just way too risky. Act 1. And he did almost the opposite in Act 2. He talked about his mother, and she sounded like this very kind of sad person, battled mental illness and alcoholism. A father, she was, I guess, sort of in and out of the hospital his whole life, and when she was around, you would kind of walk on eggshells. If anything was sort of out of order, she would kind of lose it. Everybody would flee. His father, he described his father as, he called him the invisible man, emotionally totally absent. So it sounded like a really sad place to grow up, very dysfunctional. But he said more than anything, the rule of this sort of sad house was this: don't make mistakes, because mistakes are dangerous and they're disruptive. And if you make a mistake, mom's gonna lose it. And then it's a very bad scene. So there was just this fear of making mistakes. So he was like, you just don't risk anything. Don't take chances. Don't gamble anything. Because if you lose, you're gonna pay. He was desperately afraid of failure. He was the guy in this parable The third guy who's described, who's given this one talent, and he buries it. The gift he's been given, he literally buries it, does nothing with it. And then he pays a pretty serious price. He's tossed out, wailing and grinding of the teeth, like he fails because he buried what he was given. And that was this guy's story. Despite the fact that he actually was very wealthy early on, he kind of, like I said, he just kept saying, yeah, that was all luck. But then I really found success, he said, when I figured out what I'm really good at, what God has given me. And then I was willing to roll the dice. Not like in a crazy, reckless way, but I took chances. Thanks to therapy and faith, he said he reframed his fears. I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. He reframed his fears. Growing up, mistakes were dangerous. Act 1. Act 2, mistakes were an opportunity. And he wasn't like, go look to make mistakes. He was like, yeah, avoid mistakes if you can, of course. But when you make them, don't see it as a total waste. He said he now looked at it like, mistakes, when you do make them, if your intention was good, well, then you stretched yourself. You learn from it. In a strange way, you're better because you won't make that mistake again. He said he read about successful people who had just crushed it in all aspects of life. And he read their stories. And they were all stories that had failure before the success. Mistakes before the money that these people made. And they talked about it, these successful people. Of course, you got to take chances. He talked about, this was interesting, he said some of the greatest discoveries that we now take for granted, he said they came from mistakes. Penicillin. They didn't go, whoever it was that discovered penicillin didn't go looking to discover that. He stumbled upon it. He talked about the guy who, and I didn't know this at all, the guy who invented Coca-Cola. He was a pharmacist. And he was looking to find a cure for migraine headaches. So he was doing this research with coca leaves and cola nuts. And he was kind of putting them together in these experimental ways. And he had an assistant with him in the laboratory. And the guy, by mistake, took carbonated water and by mistake mixed it with the coca leaves and the cola nuts. And Coca-Cola was born. They were like, whoa, look at this. That was never the intention. Migraine headaches, not soda. Anyway, this guy, he just went from being desperately afraid of failure to now seeing mistakes as again, not something you're looking for, but something you don't run from. Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player of them all, he said, you miss 100% of the shots that you never take. You fail at them all if you don't even try. It's this gospel. I think it's what's being said. It's what we're being kind of charged with. And so much of it was fear that led to this guy's failure in the gospel. He said it, so out of fear I went off and buried your talent in the ground. Can you think of, let's look at our lives. Can you think of some part of your past, maybe even present, that you regret? I should have pursued something. I kind of wanted to. I sort of thought I should have, but I didn't. I got spooked. I got scared. Maybe I was discouraged by somebody. Fear of maybe being embarrassed at failing stopped me from pursuing it. That job opened up, and I should have gone for it, but I was afraid of not getting it. Or maybe I did get it, and and that meant we had to move. And the prospect of going somewhere, unknown, just scared me into not doing it. And I'm not saying you always take the job. Sometimes it's good reasons to say, no, we're not going to make the move. We're here, and this is home. But sometimes we should. And if fear is calling the shots, we become the guy in the parable. I remember my father used to talk about the first house my parents bought. I guess they were about 2 years married. I think it was 1961. And they lived in Brooklyn in an apartment. And they bought this house in Floral Park. All of our family was in Brooklyn. They thought they were moving to Kansas or something. Floral Park was they thought it was a million miles away. And I remember my dad saying, he was a fireman. He was the house we bought, we really couldn't afford. And it was hardly a mansion, but it was just they didn't really, on paper, they didn't really have the money, but they did it. I guess it must have been close enough to take the chance. Well, that became home for 40 years, 132 Aspen. Had they said, I don't know, too much of a risk, that wouldn't have been home. And some other street would have been home. It wouldn't have been the end of the world. But I'm glad they bought the house they really couldn't afford. When Nelson Mandela was elected president, when he got out of jail after almost 30 years in prison in South Africa, he was elected president, and he, at his inauguration, he gave an address. Let's just listen to part of these words. They're awesome. And they talk about gifts. Sometimes I think, and I think this is what he was saying, we misunderstand humility. We think humility means we deny what makes us shine. That's not what humility is about. Humility, I think, is about giving God credit for what makes us shine, but not denying the fact that we shine. Not denying the gifts we've been given. We've been given them. That's where the humility kicks in. It's I didn't invent the gift. I'm not responsible for it. It comes from God. And I got to do something with that. If we turn it into this false humility, no, I can't, and we step away, I think we're displeasing God. We become this guy in the parable. Listen to this. This is Mandela. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant or beautiful or talented? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel so insecure around you. We are born to manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. And as we let our light shine, we give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence liberates others. How great is that? I tell you, fear it's very interesting, isn't it? It can paralyze us, and it can keep us from our dreams. It really can keep us small, but it can also keep us safe. It can be our friend sometimes. I think in the right doses. Man, but too much of it can kill us. Too much of it turns us into this tragic parable guy. I love what Mandela said. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. He's right, it doesn't. It's this parable. It's Jesus' point. You miss 100% of the shots that you never took. So don't play small.